when I was in seminary, one of the courses we had to take was called Theological Field Education. And what that meant was every Tuesday for a full day for 2 semesters, so for a full academic year, we would go out and we would do pastoral ministry. And my first field education assignment was with the Office of Pro-Life Activities for the diocese. So I got to work with Cheryl Clary, who ran the Respect Life office, but also the Mother Teresa Home, the St. Gianna Molla Pregnancy Outreach Centers, and also the Project Rachel Ministry for Healing After Abortion. And one of the things that Cheryl liked to do was when we would come in on Tuesday, she liked to give us like a recap of what happened that week to sort of bring us up to speed. And I remember one Tuesday we came in and she started telling the story about how she was called to the hospital. And there was this woman who was in her 90s who was about to die, and she needed to talk to somebody. So Cheryl went and she visited with this woman. Well, come to find out, the woman had an abortion when she was a teenager, and she carried this burden of the sin of abortion all through her entire life. And she was on her deathbed, and she was still looking for that forgiveness and that healing from that sin of abortion. And I couldn't help but thinking, what if somebody told her when she was a teenager that there's another way, that there's help for her? What if somebody told her about how she would go through 20 stages of grief and grieving the loss of her child, and that on the child's due date every year she would experience the effects of this trauma? What if somebody told her and told the man who was involved as well about all of the deep trauma that comes from the experience of an abortion? My brothers and sisters, it's oftentimes difficult to preach the gospel, but yet what we see when we don't preach the truth that God calls us to, that's when we commit the sin of omission. That's where we're being culpable and we're not helping those to live out the full stature of Christ. And today's readings are all about proclaiming the truth of God's gospel message. As we heard in the first reading from the book of Jeremiah, so to put some context to this, the Lord told Jeremiah to go to the Benjamin Gate, which is the busiest gate in Jerusalem. So that'd be and to preach to the Jewish people about how they were violating Sabbath observances. So this would be like the Lord calling one of us to go stand on the I-90 and to preach the gospel. So this is where he's telling that we have to be bold in our proclamation. But we know that this isn't always easy, because today's responsorial psalm is actually a foreshadowing of Jesus' death on the cross. For your sake I bear insult, and shame covers my face. I become an outcast to my brothers, a stranger to my mother's children, because zeal for your house consumes me, and the insult of those who blaspheme you fall upon me. I think it's very easy for us to fall into this trap of thinking about, being Christian is just something we just do on Sundays. I come to church, I talk to my church friends about Jesus, but we don't go and we don't actually proclaim the gospel to the society. And when we think about this, we're called to do this with our daily lives. We're called to invite people to come to church with us. We're called to pray with others. How many people actually, when they go out to eat at a restaurant, make the sign of the cross and then say grace before meals? These are all little ways that we can go and we can pray with others, we can evangelize, and we can witness to the importance of the truth of the Christian faith. And as today's gospel passage reminds us, oftentimes you think about, well, what are people going to think? How are they going to react? What does Jesus say? Fear no one. Plain and simple. When we're proclaiming the truth of the gospel, we're not called to fear anyone, because what we're doing is we oftentimes think about, and then Jesus goes on to say about storing up treasures here on earth, but we need to focus on storing up treasures here in heaven. And this is why he says, everyone who acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before others, I will deny before my Father in heaven. Take a moment to think about that. We have a choice. We can look good to our friends. We can be nice and not talk about our faith. But we're denying the Lord when we do that. And do we want to look good to our friends and be condemned for that? Or do we want to stick up for the truth of the gospel and proclaim what Christ asks us to and be rewarded in the kingdom of heaven? Our lifespan here on earth is short, but eternity is a long time. And this is where everything we do in this life should point towards the everlasting life. Now, I think sometimes when we get into proclaiming the truth, we tend to think about it, oh, look at me, I'm so holy, that person's a sinner, they're bad. they're not welcome in the church. Or it's like we're putting other people down, or, oh, it's that group of people that have this problem. Oh, they're so terrible. And it's like this self-righteous kind of attitude. But we need to remember what Jesus says in today's gospel passage. And he brings up the point about the two sparrows, about how sparrows will not die without our Father knowing. And then he goes on to say that every hair on our head will be counted. Now, some of us have more hair than others. But as we know, like, that's how intimately the Lord knows us. And I'll pick on Greg because he's over here. So Greg has a nice full head of hair, right? So if I tried to count all of his hair, I couldn't do it, much less his beard. And when you think about how many hair follicles there are, like, that's how intimately the Lord knows us. But he knows us even deeper. Because as the Bible tells us over and over again, the Lord knows us in the depths of our heart. Before we think something or something's placed in our heart, the Lord has already known that we've thought that. And this is how deeply the Lord knows and loves each and every one of us. And of course, this is why Jesus died to save us from our sins. And this is why our proclamation of the truth has to be done in love. If each and every one of us has inherent dignity and value, if the Lord knows every hair on our head, that means that we are blessed and loved by God. And this is where our proclamation of the truth has to be done in love. Pope Francis is very fond of using this term accompaniment, where like you're journeying with people to help bring them to the gospel. And I think this is a way that we can proclaim the truth, but doing it in love. So this is where when we go out to eat and we say grace before meals, that's a small witness to show how important our Christian faith is to us. When we invite people to come to church or to pray together, that's a way that we're inviting them and journeying with them so they can grow closer to Christ. And maybe we invite them to join a ministry here at St. Greg's or to participate in Mission Week. All of these things can help draw people to the gospel message. But if we don't have the courage to make the first step, to proclaim the truth, to stick up for what Jesus has asked us to, we have to be mindful of the eternal consequences. And just like that woman in her 90s who was on her deathbed still grieving from that sin that she committed so many years ago, we have to be mindful that these sins of omission from not proclaiming the truth have negative effects on others, both in this life and in the life to come. So my brothers and sisters, may we never be faced with that sin of not proclaiming the truth, but may we always have the courage to speak up for the truth that Jesus has asked us to. And may we always show God's steadfast love when we proclaim the truth, so that we can bring all people toward the gospel message of Jesus Christ, so they can experience that love and truth of God, and ultimately be brought to his mercy and experience it in this life and be rewarded in the life to come.